Okay, this is Zachlog the Great, and I am joined once again by my friend Harry Seldon.
Good evening.
And we are joined for the first time tonight by the Overgrown Hobbit. Hello?
Hello?
And she is also the artist behind Veg Folk Fables, which has been going for, I guess that must be like 6 or 7 years now, considering when you said it started, and was recently added to the ArcTunes site. And would you like to tell people a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Veg Folk Fables is a little bit as if the instead of writing Animal Farm, we did Vegetable Farm, and we crossed it with Narnia and Oz and all of your favorite children's books, and then they all got drunk and went out and had a party, and that's our cartoon.
Okay, and I will include a link to you guys on ArcTunes in the show description. So anyway, we are getting together tonight to talk about Harry Dresden's Jim Butcher's recent novella about Harry Dresden, The Law. Before we get to that, I did want to mention, if you like my work, you like my channel, you want to help support me, you can go to subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great and sign up anywhere between $1 and $5 a month and support me there. And the link will also be in the description. So, having said that, let's see. Like I said, we're talking about the Harry Dresden novella, The Law. And here, let me let me get this back at the beginning of the book. I have it on my Kindle here, which in some ways is more convenient. It's good for searching, but also, to get to a beginning, you have to punch a button. Get to the beginning, you have to punch a buttons instead of opening the book. As this is your first time joining us, Hobbit, would you like to start off overall impressions for first thoughts on this story?
Yeah, my first thought was Dresden is going back to his roots, and that the title is even more enticing than because we think of the law as just like legal stuff, and on the surface it is a legal sort of Perry Mason crime drama, solve the legal problem for the characters. But on the other hand, you have questions of the natural law, God's law, the law that a person has in their heart that they have to live up to or not, and what happens to them. This has got, for a little novella, this has got so much depth to it. I'm really excited to talk about it.
So I just realized, because I haven't done book. I usually do poems and we just read them.
Yeah.
So I should give a short plot synopsis. By the way, to those watching, this is not going to be a review in the sense of should I read this, because we're going to be talking about the whole thing. There's going to be spoilers all over. So, if you're interested but haven't read it yet, I would advise reading it first and then coming back. It's fairly short.
Because, yes, as Zachlog's saying, it's fairly short. It's probably not going to be it's not a direct continuation of the main plot. It doesn't directly follow. It's not a huge, there's no huge set piece battle at the end or anything. It is just a small short story set in the same world. So if you're interested, you might as well pick it up. It's about 90 pages. You might as well pick it up, see how it is yourself.
So to give a brief rundown of the story, Harry Dresden, a month or a few months after the events of Battleground, he's set up in his new home, which is also a castle, and he is contacted by someone looking for help. She is a tutor. She's running a tutoring service, and
It's
someone.
called tutoring, but the way it's described, it's much closer to a co-op homeschool
Yes.
than tutoring.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, she's running this teaching service of some sort, and she is basically being legally extorted for an amount of money that would close her down. And she basically asks him to, help her find a way out of this. And that's where the story starts. And so, and to one thing Hobbit already said, I hadn't considered that, but this is in some ways, or at least it does seem in some ways a lot more like the first few books of the series. Like, as time has gone on, Harry's cases have gotten larger, and there's been a lot more things going on. But at the beginning, he's working out of this office in a skyscraper in Chicago, and he's at least 50% just basic private eye.
Mhm.
He's in the phone book under W for wizard.
That's right.
He's that
And
level
it
of
says-
mundane in the beginning of the series.
Right. It also says the word on the street says if you need help, you call the police or the EMTs or an insurance agent. But when you need a miracle, the only one to call is you, Harry Dresden. Wizard, miracle worker. Hmm? Yeah,
Which
he's getting back to his desperate people coming to the wizard for a supernatural miraculous fix.
Well, and the other thing with that is, like when, in contrast to most of his earlier books, when he first gets involved in this, there's no clear clue that the supernatural is involved.
Right.
When he first gets involved in this, it looks like he's just going to be dealing with normal human level conflict.
Yeah.
That doesn't turn out to be the case, primarily because the person who is attempting to extort her is using a lawyer who also happens to be a member of the Winter Court of
But we
Fairies.
don't know that to start off with. All we know is that he's got a high-powered lawyer. The guy is a pimp. This is so classic noir. The girl is a prostitute with a heart of gold. She's reformed, and he even saves the cat because in saving her, he's saving the children, the poor, underprivileged children that she and her little enterprise. All the money is being plowed back into are saving the kids. So this is classic early Dresden, right? Except apparently no supernatural, right?
At the beginning, at least, yes. Now, one thing I will say, and perhaps I'm just a little oversensitive to this stuff these days, the reformed prostitute, cleaning up her life, trying to be, trying to help underprivileged kids. The choice of a client here, and this is also partly because a couple of things from recent books, it feels just a little SJW to me. I'm a little worried about the direction some future stuff is going to take, and perhaps I'm just being oversensitive. I don't know.
So I think there's something more specific than that, because as Hobbit mentioned, prostitute with a heart of gold turning her life around, that is classic for noir. That sort of thing by itself fits in perfectly. I think, Zach, I think what's tripping your alarms is one specific paragraph in the first page.
Okay.
Where they're going through the exposition. She took a slow breath. 8 years ago, I opened my business. I'd had a difficult life before that. I was a sex worker. She watched my face closely. Do you have an issue with that? And that's the part I think, because it doesn't fit with the rest of the character. She's going to Dresden, and in the rest of her dialogue, she's going for as much sympathy as humanly possible. Because obviously she knows that she doesn't have a ton of resources. She can't pay him a ton. She's relying on Dresden's goodwill. She's going to play up the sympathy. Do you have an issue with that? Is what you would have from someone on the opposite side. Some femme fatale, for instance, it would fit. But it doesn't fit here. And it seems like it was only put in so that Dresden could respond, wasn't my life, wasn't there, not my place to judge. And then after that, everybody returns back to character. Dresden starts probing again. He says, "Did you have an issue with it?" And starts digging down, figuring out what's actually going on. But those two lines there, that's what tripped my alarms. I don't know if that's Zach, like if it's the same for you. It's not just the character. It seemed like they went out of character for 2 sentences. And it was glaring.
I don't know.
In the end, though.
Go ahead. Sorry, again.
He paid it off, though. Like I said, I've read it 3 times now, and it starts off with that line. She's playing for sympathy, and she's trying to play that sympathy card throughout the story. Dresden never once, from that point forward, shows any sympathy for sex work or pimps as something to be normalized. And so when he says, I'm not able to judge, and then that pays off down the road where he shows in bits and pieces the temptations he faces as someone who does evil things for presumably a good cause. He's working for the Winter Court. He's got a date set up with a vampire. He himself is, as he points out, in no position to judge a prostitute for prostitution, particularly since she's reformed. So like I said, it's a really hard, that's why I said this in a previously message I said to Zachlog, saying this is so based. It starts off with that disarming line. If you're reading this from a woke perspective, it's very disarming. It sounds like something a woke person would say. A sex worker, do you have a problem with it? Well, who am I to judge? And then the rest of the story, he judges it. And he finds it wanting. It's evil. It's wrong. What's good. And everyone who tries to drag her back into that is also evil. And so the victory is for her to continue to be reformed, to continue to get kids off the street, to continue to do good works, and have to have repented and changed her life. I don't know if he did it on purpose or if he's just an honest writer who can't help telling the truth. But I was really pleased with the story.
Yeah, I could go with that. I could see that. And another thing is, like basically this story is taking place, like she is having these problems because that is the past. And it's like, it's not just, well, I used to do this and everything's happy, and I'm not doing it now because I choose not to, because I am a free and independent woman. And everything is happy go lucky. It's, I used to do this and oh my gosh, it's causing me problems now. And so like showing someone who has, been a part of something like that, and showing basically at least some of the natural consequences of that, that is a good way to tell a story like this. So yeah, I could.
It reminds me of another short story, and I don't remember which one it was, but another Dresden Files short story, where Dresden is working with a Yeti, and the Yeti has had a child with a human woman, and he is trying to smooth that out. You might remember which story that was off the top of your head.
There are three involving. There are three with that. And one there's what is it? B is for Bigfoot. Bigfoot on campus. And there's a third one. And I can't remember what the third one is off the top of my head. But yeah, I know the set you're talking about.
I Was a Teenage Bigfoot was the third one.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So in that, at one point there was a similar exchange where he's talking with the hybrid child's mother, and she's basically said that she's a strong, independent woman, and Dresden doesn't say anything. He doesn't object to this, but in the actions that he actually does for the rest of the, so she and the Yeti are not raising the child together. And this is where the problems in the stories are coming from. I'm not trying not to spoil too much. And for the rest of the story, he doesn't explicitly judge. Even in the narration, he's not explicitly judging. But at the same time, he is trying to get the father back into the child's life. But his actions say very clearly that he believes that children are better off with both parents, even if he's not saying it in the narration. And that sort of goes with Hobbit. That sort of goes with your interpretation of this story.
Yeah. He says the thing up front that everyone expects you to say, right? In woke America. And then he shows you the exact opposite. That what woke America tells you is a lie. Which I can't complain about that at all. In fact, because that is the power of story when it's done right, is to show you the truth. It's a lie breathed through silver, as either Tolkien or C.S. Lewis said when they were saying storytelling is lies, it's fiction is lies, and one of the other replied, yes, but it's lies breathed through silver, because it shows us something that's true, points back to the one true thing.
So I don't know if you I sent you guys I made some notes and I sent those to you guys. I don't know how much of those you read. I had hinted about this to Harry. But I did detect, English major, an overall theme to this story. And I don't know whether you guys saw that or perhaps saw something different instead. Would either of you like to put forward your own suggestions for that, or?
Go for it, Hobbit.
I think I have an excuse. I'm a biology and chemistry major, so I don't have to know anything right about English.
You like good stories.
Hey, I have read some very interesting plot twists in some chemistry papers.
Okay, so my kind of suggestion for a theme, which unfortunately does not actually include Harry, so that's kind of a weakness for this theory. But okay. My idea for a theme about this is basically, how do people respond when you apply pressure?
Ooh.
Because there are several characters in this who are basically applying pressure, having pressure applied, and the question is how, and each of them responds kind of differently, and basically how is that working out? Now, and the thing is, I don't quite see how Harry Dresden himself fits into that, because what you see of him, his own kind of character arc in this story, is he's actually, maybe I'm developing that, I don't know, but for him, he's trying to reassemble himself from being involved in this horrific battle and seeing several people he cares about killed and seriously wounded, and that's kind of what's going on for him personally. But Maya, who the person who the teacher who starts off this whole thing, she is having pressure applied to her you're going to give me this money by Tripp, by Gregory Tripp, I believe.
Yep.
And Tripp is doing this because basically he's made some deals that went south, and there's a St. Louis gang that is applying pressure to him. And so what does he do? He tries to pass that off and basically put pressure on someone else.
Yep.
What does she do? What does Maya do? Maya looks for help with the best person she can find a way to. Marcone, who it turns out is Tripp's boss. Basically, Harry goes to him and says, you need to get out of this. And Harry tries to apply pressure to him, which is not a minor threat. Now, admittedly, Marcone has resources of his own, but like having Harry Dresden threaten you is not a small thing. For most beings in this universe. All of the ones we've seen so far, I think it would be at least an annoyance if Harry Dresden decided to make himself a problem.
Well, Harry Dresden, a lot of powerful people who he can call in favors from, or who he has fealty or alliance relationships to. So he's not like he's standing alone the way Gregory Tripp appears to be.
But Harry Dresden.
Minor thing. So it's Tripp Gregory.
Oh, okay. I had the name.
It doesn't make any sense, but it's.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, it's the other way around.
Oh, okay. Well,
I've
it's
been reading a lot of manga recently, so I've been getting it backwards.
But Harry tries to apply pressure to Marcone, and Marcone just kind of sits there, like nothing happens. There's no reaction at all. And Harry, and in a kind of accidental way, Tripp applies pressure to the lawyer's secretary, and she responds by lashing back out at him. And so I don't know. It seems like a pretty significant commonality with what's going on in this story. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
It does, and I'm going to even pull your attention to the fact that when you get a plot going along, it goes along, and then there's the turn. But there's this event that causes the story to turn, and then the whole plot. I don't know how to. Don't have the right words for it. But when I was telling my daughter, you watch for it, the turn happens, and then it drives toward the climax if it's a halfway decent story. And the turn, as you pointed out, was the way Lapland, or whatever her name is. I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, Lapland.
Lapland responded to the smarmy, sleazy sexual pressure that Tripp put on her by summoning this Osto, this spirit bear, which she really didn't have the authority to do. Again, the pressure applied to her and how she responded. But this is really interesting. After the turn comes and that mistake causes the pressure that now Harry is able to bring to bear via Queen Mab and his own, alliances and the lawyer he's brought in on Marcone and on Tripp, they strike a deal. And the thing is that, okay, you're going to get punished now, Lapland. That's the deal. To save face for everybody, because you stepped out of line and you caused this embarrassment. You gave Team Dresden the leverage they needed to push through a settlement. So in Verno, the lawyer, the bad guy lawyer, was threatening to clobber her, and Lapland objects, and then Inverno's voice dropped into a cold, harsh register that made the hairs on the back of my neck, Harry's neck, crawl. Be still, he snarled, if you wish me to preserve your life. And he grovels for him. So the way she responded to pressure, because she's evil, off evil will, evil mar, is to succumb. And that doesn't tie into what we're dealing with these days with the vaxes and everything else going on. You're doing evil to other people, and pressure's applied to you. And instead of sticking to your guns and doing what's right, you succumb to save your life, you succumb for power, you succumb for revenge, you succumb for greed, and now they've got you. And so she has to crawl for him once again. She could tell him to go blank off and die and then be killed. It would be an honorable death, but she won't do that. So that's how she responds to pressure. Because earlier on, when he's talking to the good lawyer that he manages to get to work with him, he helps save the young lady who's running the child rescue organization, which is how you want to think of it, save the cat. He says something to the effect of we just have to do what's right. And everything I hear about you says that you should fight the good fight, says the lawyer. And Dresden replies, everyone should, I said. And the lawyer eventually at the end of the chapter says, yeah, we should fight the good fight. So they respond to pressure, even though it's going to cost them. By choosing what's right. They choose virtue, they choose beauty, they choose truth. And so when the fecal matter hits the rotary blades, they respond to that with pressure. Maybe they suffer, but they're more successful, which is interesting. More successful, they win. In the end, we win, they lose. Then the Laplander and Winter, the bad lawyer, and Trip, who always respond to pressure with, I'm going to take the easy way out. I'm going to choose greed. I'm going to choose viciousness. I'm going to choose cruelty. I'm going to choose lies, and they lose. And that's kind of neat.
Well, and I do have to say, like, okay, it's a fantasy story, and like I get suspension of disbelief, and okay, I can hold on for nameless demigod lawyers and spirit bears and the Queen of Winter coming to Chicago to make the Queen of the Winter Fairies coming to Chicago and making a deal. It is pushing it to have an ethical lawyer. That's me.
I knew that punchline was coming too.
Probably more rare than fairies, but they exist.
Well, speaking of lawyers, though, Harry Dresden is finally starting to think like a fae, or at least think like a fae when he has to. The solution here, the pressure that he puts on the Winter Court, is not about lives, because the Winter Court really doesn't care. He finds a legal technicality. The Spirit Bear damaged the company car. And the thing is, by fairy rules, that sort of thing is like tantamount to a declaration of war.
Well, and it's
super
or at least
about that sort of stuff.
It needs something. It needs some kind of response. It demands some kind of answer. And the other thing with that, here, give me a minute to find that spot, because he says this. Wait, navigating this on my Kindle. It must be chapter 15. It must be the last chapter. Oh no, the next to last chapter. Okay. He says this to Mab. He says, why is this my problem? And Harry answers her, well, they damaged your car. They both damaged the company car in the course of their attack. And she says, the automobile I had prepared for your use. Yes. It is damaged now. Yes. Visibly, that others may see. And it's not just they damaged this, that is a knock on my reputation.
Yes.
Other people can see that someone did harm to something of mine, and like I can't just let that go. This has to be set straight. So yeah, and that's and Harry knowing to use that is an interesting part of the story. Yes.
It's interesting that he uses that Jim Butcher, to take my hat off and being out of the being a Doyleist rather than a Watsonian. Butcher appears to be using Fae as a metaphor for the American legal system, which I'm not, put up a Stephen Crowder meme, change my mind. I'm not going to disagree with that. He might even be being generous.
The legends of Fae have always had them be very legal minded, very specific about the wording of things. I don't think it's Butcher. Butcher's continuing the trope, certainly, but I don't think it's his invention.
No, I'm saying this is the first time that he specifically put it up to the American legal system.
I see.
And said, our legal system, we're basically the Fae,
Well, and he even says, like, so the resolution you want is this goes through the regular court system, and just no one is deliberately messing with it. And Harry's like, yes. And he's like, we could just as well flip a coin. And
yeah,
Harry doesn't flat out disagree with him. He's just like, look, I'd like to imagine there's some kind of justice here. And so yeah, that's a kind of cynical view. Sorry, go ahead.
I said no. I was agreeing with you. Leave me my fond illusions, please. Right.
I think he even says delusions or some word to that effect when talking about the deal.
Yeah. But it's interesting that the assumption is that the normal course of events is the mafia, the Fae, the supernatural, the wealthy, everybody cheating, and it requires a literally supernatural act and a pact between the powers that be to agree to allow the legal system, such as it is, to proceed. And even then, you're basically getting the Fae, right? That
and the other thing with that is, like, the just a regular ordinary person is just kind of run through the system with no real power, with relatively little chance to control what is going to happen to them.
And that takes me back to that quote I gave you a while ago, which I didn't even realize the significance of at this point, which was, if you need some practical help, you call practical people like a nurse or a doctor. But if you need a miracle, you call Harry Dresden. Well, what did you need a miracle for? The legal system. If you need a miracle, huh?
And note that all this is going on in the aftermath of a terrorist attack from the perspective of the Chicago residents. This is going on in the aftermath of a terrorist attack, way worse even than 9/11. And they still have and they still have to worry about the mundane legal system as their first priority.
So
even if half the city is in ruins.
By the way, I did want to double check this, and apparently, if you're a Catholic and you need a miracle specifically relating to the courts, you might want to talk to Saint Ives of Caermarthen. He is the official patron saint of lawyers. So,
and if that doesn't work, you pray to Saint Jude. Saint Anthony, the patron saint of lost causes.
Jude is lost causes. Anthony is lost things.
That's right.
I will add to that. I don't think he is. I kind of think he should be the patron saint of locksmiths as well, because at least these days, probably keys are one of the things he gets the most calls for.
Oh my, yes. Or my glasses.
Uh, but
Have you tried checking the top of your head? That's
No,
that in my personal experience, that's where they seem to be.
I have to take them off to read. And since I'm a librarian, that's what I do spend a lot of my time doing, because I can't see my book. And then when I can't, but because I'm very nearsighted, I can't physically see where I left them. I can look, but I can't see it. And so like I lose my glasses and I yell for my family members and they go hunting for it. So if I ever have to live alone, I'm going to be in a bad way.
So other okay, on a fairly minor point, not any big things. Okay, so Harry has Bob the Skull back. Presumably, no, I guess he got him. Yeah, he got him for Battleground. And he had him with him. Yeah, because Bob was assisting him in capturing Ethne.
I thought he was with Butterball.
He had been with Waldo Butters. He had been with Waldo Butters since Changes. And like basically Harry more or less considered that the state of things and occasionally consulted with Bob. But it appears that Bob is back as Harry's regular kind of partner in these things. Harry or Bob picked up some new tricks apparently while with Butters, which kind of makes considering the two different characters, that kind of makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's not concerning though.
Well, so basically Bob can and it's not it's not explicitly explained how, but Bob can explore the internet now, among other things. So we do know what the first thing Bob did was, right?
Well, we've seen that in a previous book. When he was first with Waldo Butters in, I believe, Ghost Stories, he was able to access the internet. He just needed to be next to a physical computer, and he had something like a 9-monitor setup. He doesn't. The only change now is that he apparently has a Wi-Fi connection. He doesn't need to be near a physical computer in order to do it.
Well, the other thing with that is it's also Bob is basically interfacing with the magical constructs of the castle, because there's magical working in the very building in the building itself, and so I would it seems likely to me there's a computer somewhere else far enough away from Harry, and that's what Bob uses for this. But
he doesn't mess with the Wi-Fi. No, I'm just saying that implies that whatever Harry does to the actual hardware, he doesn't mess with the Wi-Fi, which makes sense. He doesn't mess with radio. He doesn't take out the GPS, in like a walking range. He's not like a cell phone dead zone. The cell phone itself might, crash, but he's not like a walking anti. What are they?
When
what
he doesn't want to be.
Oh, true. I guess if he uses a lot of magic, he could cause that to fry out. I don't know. I'm not really sure how that works. It's clear that an actual electronic equipment with electricity running through it, that's antithetical to magic. But I'm wondering if the radio waves and that kind of and light, I mean, doesn't necessarily affect light itself, like a torch or I'm saying things that like fire that are burning. So light waves itself aren't being messed with. So in theory, radio waves, I guess maybe I'm being too like waves, particles, electrons. I mean, how does this actually work? How does magic actually mess with the physics of the Muggle world?
These are things science fiction and fantasy fans spend a lot of time on, so you're not really out of the mainstream with these questions.
There a few books ago, we even saw computers that could work in direct proximity to Harry Dresden, even when he put out a little bit of effort sort of probe and see what was going on. We know it's possible to make computers that work partially off magic that are immune to this sort of low-level interface because Odin's secretaries have them.
Right.
Well, but it's also mortal magic that does this.
Yes.
And
it
so
is not. It was a plot point that Molly Carpenter
could use
a regular cell phone and not break it now.
So, yeah, and from some things Harry said in, I don't know which book it would be now, but from some things Harry said about the apartment, I guess that has to be Peace Talks because that's the only time we see him there. Like the Svartalfs managed to adapt human technology in some way to make it tolerate his presence more than it usually would.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Harry. I kind of doubt Harry has them working with him at the moment. But although with how much everything got shaken up, they may have overlooked that. The incident, the trouble that had happened previously.
Honestly, I'm a little surprised that nobody has tried doing things like using etching techniques to make millions of microscopic summoning circles on a circuit board. Because you could absolutely do that. Any magic based on geometric features, you could absolutely do with microfab.
That actually is starting to sound a little bit like the Covenant Chronicles, which Harry and I also talked about. I don't know if you're familiar with those at all, Hobbit.
Is these the Thomas Covenant in the Unbeliever series by Donald?
No.
It's different.
I gave up on them pretty early because Thomas Covenant is a wanker.
Oh God, I started that and I got like 6 or 7 chapters in. I'm like, I hate this guy. I don't want to. I don't care.
Yeah. The world was cool. Don't get me wrong. The world he built was amazing. I read an excerpt that he never included in the book, in one of his short story collections, which he didn't include because he realized it had no Thomas Covenant perspective. And I was like, well, you could have written the whole book that way.
Yeah, I hated that character. But no, this is the Covenant Chronicles by
Kaiwei Chia.
Kaiwei Chia. Also, I think that's the same person as Benjamin Chia.
Kaiju?
Sorry?
Does he do the kaiju books? Like the giant monster books?
That sounds familiar. I haven't read them, but I think
if you're talking about Monster Hunter International, I think that's somebody else.
No, I know what she's. That could be him. Let me see if I can bring up his website and find this out right now. Benjamin Chia. Let's see. Bibliography. Covenant Chronicles, Song of Karma. I don't know. I think I remember, but I don't. For these titles aren't telling me that themselves, so I'm not sure.
This No Gods, Only Daemons.
Yes.
Oh, yes. I like those. I'll have to try the Covenant ones because I love Pacific Rim and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So No Gods, Only Diamonds. He's done 2 more. If you're unaware of that.
And those are the Covenant Chronicles that we're talking about.
Oh, I didn't know they were the Covenant Chronicles. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. I've only read the first 2 books.
And actually, Chris, another friend of mine, Chris and me, and then Harry and me, held one of these talks on all 3 of those. So.
Oh, nice. I'll look that up.
So. Anyway, back to this story. What was one thing I found interesting, and it's like Harry, Jim Butcher was gonna have to do something like this. He had to come up with something like this to have the stories continue anything like they have. And apparently, the U.S. government has put out a story that there was a hallucinogenic chemical attack, and
Which I believe you predicted in our last discussion.
I
Battleground.
may have. I don't know. I actually just listened to those the other day because I'm like, well, we're going to be talking about Harry Dresden again. I should see what we said previously. But you could be right. But yeah. So they said there's and I don't have what the acronym stands for, but there was this gas HBGB that can have lingering effects for a long time and it caused all these horrible hallucinations. And it's like, and so it's an interesting question. It'll be an interesting question going forward. Basically, when Harry is dealing with someone who's not already, in the know, is this a person who buys that story, or is this a person who knows that something else is going on? And that'll be interesting to see.
It was clear, as you said, that Butcher had to do something to half put the masquerade back on. This, I think, was one part of it, and the other part of it was he mentioned this in both books repeatedly, that the magical battle had caused all electronics, and I bring this up because it goes back to what Hobbit was talking about, even stopping things like outgoing radio signals. Chicago was an entirely black zone electronically for that whole night. And so you don't have reliable video proof. You don't have reliable live communication from the time. It was the only way you could explain the world not being completely upside down. As it is, the fact that the legal system is still functioning at all right now is sort of encouraging.
What was let's
It's
see.
neat he played it out. There's a lot of stories like, Harry Potter has the Ministry of Magic casting spells, erasing people's memories if they see something magic, obliviate. The Percy Jackson books have the myths, which obscures understanding. So when people see the Furies appear and blow up a bus, they interpret it as bus crashing and there's a terrorist explosion and the ladies were just 3 old ladies with physical disabilities. But they never really play off how that will work with the population in terms of a negative effect when you're trying to tell someone this is what's really happening, this is the world behind the illusion, here's your red pill. And they're like, I can take the red pill, but it won't make any difference because the government explanation has already sort of screwed the pool, as it were. And now they're not going to believe you. I've got the heebie-jeebies, he says. I was exposed to the gas, and now I'm having flashbacks and hallucinations, and it's just a after effect, just like, scoring really well on an end of term test causes you to have a heart attack, and it wasn't, some RNA genetic therapy that you took 2 weeks before. You believe it.
That was actually on my notes here. It's like, okay, so which people are going to believe this HBGB story? And I also had those who don't probably did not get the vaccines.
Nope.
Well, and it's a kind of thing, and we actually see this, unfortunately, to some extent in our own lives. It's like if you can get people to the point where, for whatever reason, they are willing to deny the very evidence of their own senses,
Mm-hmm.
like you can get them to go along with anything. And so you can get people to do that. And it's a scary thing.
So
But there
here's
are far more people now.
Okay, Harry, go on.
There are far more people now than knew about it before, because we also see that there are people who do remember exactly what happened. All the ones who survived from Harry's army from the end of the book, they all remember, and he runs into one of them towards the end. There's still going to be. I don't think you're not going to go completely back to normal. They're not going to rebuild and cover everything up, and we go back to the same number of people knowing about the supernatural as before. The cat is still partially out of the bag here.
Yeah, and so that's going to be an interesting variable in future stories. Any, given, ordinary person he runs into, he's not going to have it's not going to be, there's going to be some probability that this is someone who knows that the world is not what they've been previously told.
And what's going to be interesting is for the people who don't, how many of them are going to be like Trip Gregory here and not believe any of it? Or for the people who might eventually believe it, what kind of evidence would you need?
Well, and
if you see one thing, or if you see 10 things, if you get attacked by a spirit bear, at what point do you conclude that it's not the heebie-jeebie?
Yeah, and it's go ahead.
In the case of the example that you just gave, Harry, was in chapter 14. He runs into a police officer after the attack from the Otso. And everything's a hot mess. He's at the scene of the crime, property damage, and you know who Harry Dresden's previous interactions with the police or the feds have been. But he recognizes the young cop. It was one of the people of Chicago who followed the banner of my will, and they'd fought against the invaders, despite being a pickup team of volunteers. And everyone that night who followed me wound up wounded. Most were dead. He opens his jacket, reveals a homemade craft store pin with a bean glued to it, the award I'd given the survivors at the wake for the fallen, one of my Knights of the Bean. And he just gives Harry a pass. They recognize each other. He realizes that he's seeing something that's real, right? Not Harry Dresden terrorist, not mundane explanation, but this is a knock-on effect of the supernatural battle they fought together. So apparently it's going to take something like your own personal involvement in the event itself and not just seeing it for you to believe your lying eyes. And I wonder how much that applies to the mundane world that we live in and people being willing to believe the truth about what's happening in front of them. They have to live it. They have to experience it themselves and not just seeing it happening around them. But by my experience, I mean you're a real player in the story,
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
I have a minor correction to what I was saying before. I just reread the relevant part of Battleground. They did mention the chemical attack here in that previous book. So I thought I remembered that it was us speculating, but this was established in the book. They just hadn't come up with the name yet. Go on, Zachlog.
Oh, and another thing in this one, and I kind of wonder whether this is going to be a problem for Jim Butcher. This is a short story, so it's relatively compact. It's not that hard to kind of maneuver around it. Maggie is never mentioned.
No, Maggie is mentioned once.
Okay.
So this is in chapter 4. He's talking with Bob. Bob is listing the options, and one option is buy him off. And Harry responds that the castle is expensive. After what I set aside for Maggie, I've barely got enough to run it for the next 18 months. I can't buy him off. So he does mention Maggie here. She doesn't show up in the story directly, but she is someone who is very much on Harry's mind.
Okay.
And I noticed that because he doesn't, for the second book in a row, he doesn't mention Bonnie at all.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this is relatively short. But
yeah,
he would also. I was expecting what was going to happen was Bonnie was basically going to take Bob's place with Harry, and and Bob would stay with Waldo. So how soon is this after?
It starts 1 month after, it finishes 4 months after.
Okay.
And that's where my suspension is. A court case, a civil suit finishing in 3 months is a bit ridiculous.
In Chicago?
Well, okay. Now,
In Chicago.
Okay, well, I will say on that point, okay, Marcone agrees not to apply pressure to either side.
Mhm.
I think he would. I think neither he nor Dresden would object to him applying pressure to getting the case just moving. And so I could buy that
That's a good
as
point.
as an explanation for why this thing is sorted out.
That's
Yeah.
because that makes sense. With what he was, with his response to Dresden earlier, he needs to follow his rules, but it's clear that he doesn't particularly like Trip Gregory either. He's doing this because Trip was very loyal to him, and so he cannot break that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean he has to like the guy.
Well, and
To the story, which is the law, the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, and who's obeying what.
So let's see. Other things I had. Kind of one thing interesting. The conclusion of this story. Trip Gregory loses the case, and he comes out of the courtroom, and basically right then, I guess basically these people are like, it looks like we're not getting our money, and the St. Louis mob meets him right outside of the courtroom, grabs him, and takes him off to an unknown but presumably very unpleasant fate. Harry and Maximilian Valerius, something like that. They see this, and Max is like, "Are you gonna do anything?" And Harry's like, I don't think so." And this is something I think is kind of important, and I think our society is not good at, which is sometimes you just have to let people take the consequences of their actions. Like, Harry wasn't doing this to him. It was just basically, you made these choices. This is what it adds up to. This is where you end up. And it's not nice to act that way, but sometimes you just have to let people feel the pain of what they have done. And if you're not willing to do that, basically you're just creating a lot more pain down the road for everyone. And I think that's an interesting element to the conclusion there.
It's foreshadowed at the end of the Otso attack when the Trip basically says, even though you saved my life, I'm still going to get my pound of flesh. And Harry says, some people can't learn. You're welcome, I said tiredly, and turned to leave. Hey, wait, Trip said, rising. Dresden, what about me? I already saved your life. I said, walk your own ass home. So clearly, he can't violate his own law and just say, all right, I could save your life, but I'm not gonna. I'm gonna let the Otso eat you. Nope, I'm gonna do the right thing and keep you from being murdered. But I'm not gonna drive you home. That's on you, buddy.
Now,
go ahead.
Oh, the question I had at that point. So suppose that Spirit Bear attack completely changed Trip's mind. So suppose that he decided at that moment that he was going to cooperate. Wouldn't he still end up in St. Louis anyway?
Harry had made him an offer.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes,
I think
but
Harry would probably go with that.
Yep.
But he pointed out that if Harry couldn't intimidate him, the odds of being able to intimidate this whole group of very unpleasant people are not actually that good.
That was
Well,
Trip's
also,
perception.
oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't
That
hear.
was Trip's perception. That is Trip's perception, not necessarily the reality. Remember, Harry Dresden, the miracle worker, pulling in favors. Remember the whole tie-in with Mab and all the spiritual the Fey court elements is probably somebody who farms St. Louis in the Winter Court or one of the other courts, and you can pull some strings and get them to lay off Trip, at least for a little while. They're not very
And the other
satisfied.
thing, like Harry is at least a little less willing. What is it? Marcone says, "Okay, like you've disagreed with how I do things before, and I've let that go. Now you're interfering with my people, and if you interfere with my people, I'll start interfering with your people." And I think Harry, part of the reason Harry was, showing a little more restraint was like, okay, I'm dealing with Marcone here.
True.
And, not only is he powerful, he's also right where I live. I think, if he needed to make well, he's powerful, he's right where I live, and we've had this strange, enemy / ally relationship going for a while now. But like, in the very first book, Harry goes to one of Marcone's properties, blows the doors in, and, basically attempts to, and somewhat successfully terrorizes, Marcone into, getting him what he needs. And, that was the first book. There's a lot more to Harry now. If he needed to, I think he would be able and willing to, go to St. Louis and explain, no, you're letting this guy go. Trust me, you don't want to push on this.
But it wouldn't have made any sense for the character that they've already developed for him to suddenly have a surfeit of gratitude, good judgment, and common sense. I mean, I do believe in miracles.
True.
That would have been that's almost as ridiculous as the court case going through in a couple of weeks.
I could see not so much surfeit of good sentence, but the fear switching. He's driven by fear throughout the whole story. If the immediate fear of things like Spirit Bear attack overrides the more slightly more abstract fear of whatever the St. Louis people have in mind for him, I could see that. I could see switching horses for that reason.
I think you have it backwards. I think the as a lifelong mobster, the knowledge of what the St. Louis people can do to him is
true. Yeah, he can.
Yeah,
it's easier to dismiss the ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So, one other thing interesting in this one, and I don't believe this is something Harry has run into before. At least I don't remember it. One of the primary antagonists in this book is like I said before, a demigod acting as a lawyer who also doesn't actually have a name. He is for the duration of this story, known as Talvi Inverno, which is two words from two different languages for winter, because he is acting under the protection of winter. But he doesn't actually have a name, and that's part of the story of this character. I don't know. I didn't look up. I think Harry said you might have looked up some more information about this, but I didn't look up any original mythology or anything. But one interesting thing with that is, well, a couple of interesting things. One, I remember Jim Butcher saying, Harry Dresden has has, for a wizard, a rather reckless habit of giving names to things, and that has consequence. And then also, the what is
when he
it?
met Uriel for the first time, he tried to give Uriel a nickname, and the nickname was Yuri. So removing the L part at the end, the L part, of course,
Big
meaning
deal.
of God. And Uriel was not happy at all. Everything else Harry did in that whole conversation, Uriel sort of brushed off, all the normal abrasiveness. But that, he immediately put a stop to that. And he said, "You are not calling me something that means light without God."
Although
And that
Harry,
seemed... Go for it, yes.
although Harry did manage to get him to settle for Mr. Sunshine.
Yes.
And well, it's Ivy as well. The archive. She didn't actually have a personal name. And he decided she was Ivy. Lash is another one.
Well, Lash was the most extreme example in that Lash seemed to become an actual different person from Lashael because of that name, or at the very least, the name got the ball rolling.
And so there's that aspect of Harry Dresden the story as a whole, and then in the mythology, as Bob explains it, the nameless son's mother declined to give him a name because she thought that would make him more powerful. And so this has shorn him of some element of power, but also it not having a name and not having that kind of, that also has a kind of protection with it, in that he doesn't have a true name that can be invoked, which it's like seeing how those kind of different elements interact is kind of interesting as well.
C.S. Lewis said that human beings are amphibians. We're part supernatural and part natural. Most people tend to think of like the mind, which there's a supernatural element to, and the body, as that's this dichotomy. But I prefer to think of us, the mind and the body, from a biology perspective, whereas there's the neurons, there's neurochemical behavior, there's electrical behavior, and then there's the spirit that animates us, and that's the you have the I that is I when you're 3, and the I that is I. It's the same one when you're 57, and yet there's not a single molecule in your body that's the same as when you were 3. So there is this supernatural element to people. And in the Harry Dresden world, it's very clear that there are beings that are purely supernatural. And what do we know about the supernatural? The most important thing is we know that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. The Word is a person, right? The words and names are very, very important in truth, in terms of how the universe is actually made and how it's maintained. So it seems that, and we know from our baptisms, that we become new people in Christ and we get a new name. We have our Christian name, as we're named in baptism. So I don't know how much, again, I don't know how much of this is due to your nose, or he's telling the truth, and since he's not woke, he's not a social justice warrior, he doesn't have this burning need to eradicate the truth behind Christendom and behind our culture, so he just leaves it in, or whether this is something he's doing deliberately. Yet, nonetheless, it makes sense that Lashael, becoming Lash, being baptized, if you will, into a new person, one that Harry wants her to be, for her being with the will to choose love and truth instead of greed and hatred and spite, changes her. Because for the supernatural, without our physical bodies to keep us bound into time and into matter, the name is all there is. And the more supernatural you are, the more important that name becomes, because that is your tie to eternity and to your identity, to your eternal identity. So, metaphysics for the win.
Hobbit, I have to ask, have you heard the theory about the fall of Rome relating to true names?
No, never have.
All right, and this is as crackpot a theory as it goes, but I love it. So, in 82 BC, Sulla executed the scholar Quintus Serranus, I think, for publicly revealing the secret true name of Rome. Because, of course, Rome had a secret true name, just like human beings do in the Dresden universe. and all the books and writings which contained the true name itself were blotted out, and this worked. We don't know what it was. So the theory is that about 100 years later, our Lord, of course, was omniscient. He knew the true name, and he also knew that St. Peter would be going to Rome and eventually center the church there. So he gave the true name to St. Peter, and it was then passed from pope to pope in case it was ever needed. But when you're in Rome yourself, using Rome's true name is kind of like Samson smashing the pillars that he's underneath. And so nobody used it despite all the persecution and everything. So Saint Pontian rather, was the first pope to abdicate shortly before his martyrdom in 235. So Saint Pontian, no longer pope, still knew the name but was no longer obligated to keep it a secret. The theory goes that he said the true name at the moment of his martyrdom. And what happened 3 years later? The emperor was assassinated. The year of the 6 emperors kicked off, and Rome didn't fully recover until the Edict of Thessalonica. What happened in the Edict of Thessalonica? Well, Rome was baptized and became a Christian city. What happened was with baptism, you get a new name.
You get your true name.
So,
yes.
Yes. I know I'm way off topic here, but it is my favorite crackpot theory about history.
Oh, that someone has to incorporate that into. Well, I'll let my writer know. Because we have all kinds of crackpot theories that we've explored, and that are part of the secret history of the alternate cartoon universe where the vegetables live. Some of which have appeared, and some of which have not yet appeared in the story. I'll ask him what he thinks of it.
Excellent.
I'm only responsible for the pseudobiology.
Well, hey, when you have talking vegetables, the pseudobiology is pretty important.
Yes, we're an age 10 and up comic, so I can't actually get into it. But let's just say romance is very complicated for these people.
Let's see. Other. Oh, so this was a very minor point, but I don't think I'd tried like doing this before, but for some reason while I was reading this, I suddenly tried to like basically cast in my head a couple of the parts, and I was thinking like, okay, if I was putting this in a movie or on TV, who would be Marcone? And I have my answer, and I've heard 2 other answers from other people so far. I also, whenever I ask this question, I also include a magical casting time machine that you could get someone from, when they were 30 years younger if you need to. But Harry or Hobbit, who would you put as Marcone?
Okay, well, first of all, if we did them, it would have to be an anime. Because only the Japanese could do it right. And it would have to be one of the Studio Ghibli characters, but I don't know which one at the moment. So I'm gonna just play it safe and say Orson Welles, or that guy, the really square-jawed, stocky guy. I don't know his name because I never know actors' names, but he was one of the black and white Three Musketeers movies that were good. And he played, I think he played Porthos, but I'm not sure. But you recognize if you saw him. He looks like a Marconi.
Harry, how about yours?
Mine is the problem with mine is that it doesn't actually fit the descriptions in the books at all. But I can't help but see it. So this is the description in the book. This is from one of the tie-in comics illustrations. So this is presumably what Marcone is supposed to look like. But I watch too much Person of Interest. I can only see him as Enrico Corleone.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if either of you have ever seen, but the personalities, the looks are totally different, but the personalities are very similar. I mean, it's the glasses. The glasses give you that sense of culture and knowledge there. So I can't help but see it.
He would be perfect. The actor, I mean, he'd do a great job. He's also in Veronica Mars.
Really?
I have no idea what his name is, though.
I see. There's That's not too far from the one I was thinking, which I guess I don't remember his. The only thing I distinctly remember from the books about his physical descriptions is he has green eyes.
Yes, the color of used dollar bills, I believe.
And also he's pretty physically fit, like not like jacked, but clearly not letting himself slide. But I picture Michael Ironside. Do you know the name, or do I need to put
from the original Top Gun, right?
No, he's talking the TV show.
Could be. Let me see. Michael Ironside.
Talking about an actor named Michael Ironside, not the TV show Ironside from back when our parents were kids.
Let's see. Now the primary place I think of him is from Starship Troopers. Yes, he was in Top Gun.
Okay. I know who you're talking about then.
Yes, so do I. But I also think that actually played Ironside when he's out of the wheelchair would be great.
I don't know that one.
He voiced Darkseid in the Justice League show and the Superman animated series. Okay, I'm on board then. He has the look certainly, but he also has the voice.
Okay. Let's see.
Oh, and the actress who played he was in this TV series King and something rather detective, but she was also dressed up as a blue Marvel character who was a shape changer, and I'm blanking on her name. She's like Rogue's
Mystique?
mom or something. Mystique, thank you. There's a really blonde actress who played Mystique who would make a great grown-up Maggie.
Oh, there's two actresses. Hold on, I'm looking it up. That's the wonderful thing about Google.
A TV show that she's just like, oh, she'd be a great Maggie.
Rebecca Ramjan?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
That's the one.
She was one of the two decent characters on Star Trek Discovery too. And I say decent. She only got about 5 minutes of screen time, which is probably why they didn't have enough time to ruin her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could. She has the height. If you're the child of Harry Dresden, you're going to be very tall. And Rebecca Ramjan has the height and build. The other actress who would play. This is gonna bother me. Give me one moment. Here, Adrienne Packley. I don't know if you've ever seen Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yes, I have. I remember the shows. I just don't remember any of the actors or actresses' names.
Okay, yes. So she played Bobby, the secret agent who Mockingbird, I think. And so she also had the less flatteringly, she played Wonder Woman in a horrible 2011 pilot, but that's not. I don't hold that against her. She also would be has the build and look to be a grown-up Maggie.
So, do any of you guys watch anime?
I've only watched a few things.
Okay.
I'll answer truthfully when Zacklog's not recording.
We should come up with the anime Dreamcast for the Dresden books, because I already know who I want to marry.
Let me turn this around. Have you seen the anime for the Foundation trilogy? Not the Foundation trilogy, for Doc Smith's Lensman series.
No, there's an anime for Lensman?
It is the weirdest thing.
Oh, I bet.
It is bizarre by anime standards and by Doc Smith standards, and that's saying something.
Okay.
So yeah, if you haven't seen that, you might like it.
I probably would.
Okay.
But yeah, I love anime, but it's like a lot of things. It has great potential for wonderfulness, but there's also like stuff that there's not enough brain bleach in the world to make your brain clean again after even looking at 2 seconds of it. So it's a minefield.
So let's see. I only had a couple more notes here that I wanted to cover. So one thing I put down here is it's interesting to see how Harry is using his new castle, because it doesn't talk about it a lot, but it basically says there are a few people who he's a few people who basically had their homes wrecked who he's putting up, and like they're him and some of the other people he had previously worked with are like basically running a soup kitchen
Mhm.
at some points, and I'm like, I hadn't thought about I hadn't thought too much about what he'd do with it, but like this seems pretty obvious now that I do.
Okay.
Yeah, that and the true name thing, both of them are things that make perfect sense with the mechanics of the story, but that I never thought of ahead of time.
So the shocking explanation is that, he's aftermath of this traumatic event. It's all very terrible. The castle is not really a big player in the story, not like the apartment used to be. But then you've got the Doylist explanation, which is I don't think the author really knows what he's going to do with it at the moment. And that's why it showed up briefly, and it was barely even a character on stage, and then it's gone. And since we know Dresden uses places as characters, I mean, there's a love affair with Chicago running through the whole series, including special parts of Chicago, his apartment, that cool little pub. The places are all very important to the story. The fact that the castle got a drive-by is, I think, indicative that the author hasn't decided yet what role it's going to play going forward.
So one other thing I have in here, and this is just something a game I kind of tend to play with books I think about much. I was trying to assign various male characters at least sociosexual hierarchy roles.
Oh
yeah. And so I was just and I think I started this with this book because Will of of the alphas, I think in this book he's basically playing, at least as far as we see him in here, he's playing a Bravo to Harry. He's trying to, whether or not that's his natural role, that's what he's doing here. He's trying to, get things moving and help his leader effectively lead. Well, and I don't know, and I hadn't thought about it too much from the previous books, whether that is his complete role or whether that's just what he's doing here.
Mm-hmm.
Paranoid Gary is obviously Omega. The only thing that Butcher didn't mention was that he probably needed a shower. But other than that, it fits very well.
He would have fit in perfectly with the hackers in the Covenant Chronicles. I couldn't help but keep thinking they're the same. They're the same people.
Yeah. Yes, that works too. Marcone Alpha. There's like both in terms of his practical role and his personality. I was gonna say Harry is Alpha, but I was just thinking about like, wait, would he be Alpha or actually might he be, because he doesn't really fit in very well most of the places he ends up. So I kind of feel like maybe Sigma would be better.
Sigma seems the non-Tumblr equivalent of coming up with your own cool gender. Insofar as that hierarchy exists at all, which I'm not sure about, it seems like a silly addition to a potentially silly concept.
Well, it's as explained by Vox Day, which I'll give my understanding, and if he ever hears any of this, maybe he would correct me.
Let me, to my understanding, Vox Day came up with the concept of Sigma and then applied it to himself.
Yes.
Yeah, I stand by my my perception of it.
No, if you've been raised by an alpha like I was, and I literally, I mean, my dad is essentially Admiral Vorkosigan, okay, from the Bujal Quality stories, and I'm a less damaged Miles in some ways. If you've been raised by an alpha, you know what an alpha looks like. But you've also probably run into people who are alpha in the sense that they can be like my dad and lead men, but they don't have that natural. Even to this day, people will say Admiral last name was a bad word the sailors use, with pratfalls, and it's terrifying. But when the fecal matter hit the rotary blades, that was the man you wanted to follow into battle. Now that's classic alpha. But you're looking at characters like Sharp from Sharp's Rifles. You're looking at every person who can be a leader of men, if necessary, but basically suck at it. And yet at the same time, they get the girl. So there's the sexual aspect of it. They're perceived as, higher ranking in terms of the social dynamics between men, because people don't want to pick fights with them. People don't want to, don't really try to challenge their dominance, and their leadership role, but they don't actually lead. They don't step into that leadership role. So I tend to think of Sigmas as people who are either they don't have whatever quality that makes men leaders, but they sometimes appear to be leaders because of sort of the sexual dynamics. And it's women, not men, who decide where you are in the sexual part of the hierarchy. Because man proposes, woman disposes when it comes to sex. We're the ones who decide where you guys are in terms of sexual hierarchy, and we don't play fair. We're not reasonable. We're not wise. We follow the basis part of our natures. Hypergamy is real. So yeah, the Sigma, the Alpha, the Bravo, all of those people are, the sexual aspect of it is very much decided by women, and it's very much a yes or no thing. And before Vox came up with what I thought was merely an entertaining story device, and it really is. It's fun to apply it to stories. I didn't realize the men's human rights movement completely split it. There were the men that women were willing to have sex with, and father their children and share genetic material with, and then there were everyone else, and it was very much binary. But men among themselves, it's more important. There's much more going on than just the sex, that the part that the women do. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing that he came up with. I think your judgment about that is mistaken. In terms of, he just decided he was a Sigma. I think Foxe is far too analytical and far too much of a what's the word for it? I haven't got a good polite word, so I don't use it. But it's the kind of person that I am. That I have my own opinion. I think I'm right, and I have no qualms about telling people what I think.
I will say, like, in terms of this story, like, okay, I'm not sure which of those I would put Harry in, but I would pretty definitely put Talvi as Sigma.
Yeah,
because he does have a dominant personality, including very clearly with the woman he's involved with, but like he just doesn't want to deal. He doesn't want to be a leader. He doesn't want to deal with like the social system as a whole, and so he's happy to be outside of most of it and do his thing. And I'm not sure whether Harry, because like my rough understanding would be, a Sigma is kind of someone who can do the job of an Alpha, but is generally uncomfortable with it.
Maybe,
or that's part
of it. Because there's that, if you've ever, like I said, you've been with someone in a hierarchy who is a real leader, there's that the leader gives as well as much as takes, and it requires a very generous personality to be have that relationship with men, if you see the dynamic that takes place among men. The sexual part is really easy to do. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be telling you guys what the alpha role is. It's this, and what the delta and the all that is, because that's a male thing. It's not a female thing. I'm just describing my background with an alpha dad in the military. And in fact, for a long time, I thought Trump could not possibly be alpha because he was such a slut. And I grew up with a Christian alpha father. So in my mind, you couldn't possibly be a true alpha and a leader of men if you were a fornicating, slut who didn't stay faithful to your wife. I couldn't possibly conceive it. But of course, that's not true. There's plenty of great leaders of men throughout history, and men can speak to that are badly behaved sexually. But
well, and it's the kind of characteristic.
If the boss will fall for the guy, he's an alpha, a bravo, or a sigma. If you can walk into a bar and see a totally hot blonde girl, and she is just a babelicious, and go up to her and chat her up and ask for her phone number, and she will give it to you out of the blue, you're not a delta, you're not an omega, you're not a gamma, you're one of the other three. It's a given. I know girls who've been in that situation. I know the guy who actually did it was a Top Gun pilot. Of course, he was a Bravo, though not an Alpha. So this stuff has predictive power. It's interesting. Anyway, sorry, I'm trying to.
These go all over the place. So if you listen back to our previous ones, you'll see some of that.
I don't think we've had one that stayed on topic the entire time.
No.
I'm interested in anime characters in Dresden.
Okay. At the same time, we have been going for an hour and a half. I've covered most of what I want to say. Harry, any other big things from this story you wanted to touch on before we close out the night?
So the one last thing I want to say, do you remember covering the story Christmas Eve that he did years ago? Yeah. If you work out the timeline, that story takes place several months after this one.
After this, yes.
And that I'm going to be curious as to how exactly that fits in, because Dresden is at Michael's house in that story. He's not at the castle. And Maggie is also at Michael's house in that story, not at the castle.
I wasn't getting the impression that Harry was necessarily living there.
Yeah, but he wasn't living there, but I wasn't sure on whether or not Maggie was. When the story was written, in the most recent book, Maggie was living with Michael. Mm-hmm. And right now she's not. So I'm wondering, why did they end up back there? It could be just a simple continuity error. I know that he made some edits to the story after publishing Peace Talks because he didn't want to give too much away about Peace Talks there. So could be a continuity error. It could just be that they were visiting because Michael's his closest friend, because she lived with him for years. They were merged. The families merged at least a bit. Could be as simple as that. But I am curious if that's subtle. If that's I'm curious as to how that's going to work. So,
well, and it's let's see. I would totally buy, for the context of this story, like, okay, Harry got himself got himself a cot and a cheap dresser, but he'd like to actually have a nice room for Maggie before she moves in, and he hasn't been able to make that happen yet. And he has some place she can actually live, pretty well in the meantime. So I could buy that for this story.
Also, he starts off with him emotionally messed up. I mean, he's completely traumatized by this whole experience, and he's not emotionally available to any of his friends. He's checking out mentally. Michael might have insisted that Maggie stay with him.
It also, I hadn't thought of this before, and I probably thought of this just now because I was listening to the earlier talks. There's a couple points in this story where something, sets off Harry's memory, and he just he enters like, you know, a minor fugue state basically, and someone has to like, wake up, we're here.
The narration was a lot like when the Nagloshi
That
hit
was
him.
the I was like, wow, this is exactly like, you know, what he was dealing with that, except this is something that at some point, you know, not hopefully not this traumatically, but most of us are going to see something like this at some point. And it's kind of interesting to see that connection there.
Yeah, Maggie might not be with him for a very good reason, that Harry is aware enough to realize that he can't be a proper father to her yet. And he's leaving her with Michael and the family to dress.
It could be. I mean, we know that was why he made the decision he did last time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Hobbit, how about you? Any last things you wanted to touch on before we close out for tonight?
Just that I was so delighted to see Jim Butcher join other writers in giving the proverbial finger to Trad Pub and self-publishing their novels. I hope many, many more of the big money makers do so, and Macmillan and Tor and all the rest of them can just go down and
I actually saw something about that. What is it? I saw something about the big publishers in the past few days, and I don't have the numbers up, but like they had like, you know, an enormous number of books they publish, like a certain percentage, you know, sell like a couple of dozen copies, and you know, basically, you know, depending on who's publishing this book, it's kind of a like sometimes it's effectively a money laundering operation.
Yeah.
You know, because if they pay them in advance, but you know they never earn out that advance, and they pretty much know this is going to happen, they probably have a pretty good sense, and so yeah, it's interesting to see how that kind of thing is going to shake out as well.
Interesting times.
Okay. Well, thank you, Harry, and thank you, Hobbit, for joining me tonight. And to everyone who has stayed with us for this whole discussion, thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts as well. And good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.